If you were a guest in my home, chances are good you'd stay here in our guest bedroom, and you would, probably without ever asking a question, sleep underneath this picture. Here's the print in its entirety, the way I have it framed and hung in our guest bedroom. A close-up on this famous moment in history in 1954 when two men, Roger Bannister and John Landy, competed head-to-head, both of them having previously smashed the 4-minute mile record in independent events. And now we're running together in the Commonwealth Games in Vancouver, Canada, head-to-head for the first time to see if they could beat each other, both men finishing in under 4 minutes in the 1-mile competition, a barrier which only until the year before had been assumed by some to be impossible. What I love about this print is it has the signatures of both Landy and Bannister associated with their images. That's Bannister on the left and Landy on the right. Landy running for Australia, Bannister running for England. Both of these men, amateur athletes basically, and had done through training and effort the impossible. It's also a good place to start in our conversation about what it means to run like a man. Let's jump in. Hello and welcome back. I'm James McQuivey. This is the second in a series of 3 videos I'm doing on how to run like a man. If you missed the first video, go back to that. It's a great introduction, and in it we learn from how some elite running women run, what it means to run like a man. Now, today we're going to focus not on the marathon, nor are we going to focus on elite women runners. We're going to focus on the story I've already teased up for you, which is a famous story of something called the Miracle Mile. This is the story of how human beings broke the 4-minute mile barrier. And it's really a remarkable one. I'm going to propose that to really understand the story, you read the book, The Perfect Mile by Neil Bascom. Bascom does an amazing job in this book of telling the history of the 2 men who first broke the 4-minute mile. Now, the story that makes these 2 so interesting gives us a few things that we can learn for today and that I can learn specifically as I think about what it means to run like a man. So let's start with Roger Bannister. So Roger Bannister was a medical student. This is the era of amateur athletics. In fact, I'd say it's the peak of amateur athletics, where the Olympics had really inspired this idea that the average person with a little bit of training and a little bit of pluck could just become a national sport champion. And Bannister was exactly that person. Just nights and weekends would go out there on a cinder track and try to figure out how he could run just a little bit faster. Now, at the time, it was believed by some people that the human body wasn't capable of running a mile in under 4 minutes. I don't want you to pay too much attention to that idea, though, because later writers would say, oh, no one believed they could run a 4-minute mile. They just didn't believe in themselves. And once they were able to believe in themselves, they could break past the 4-minute mile barrier. That's actually complete hogwash. And it doesn't reflect at all what was really happening. What was really happening is that we were transitioning from an era of amateur athletes who kind of did something for a couple of months and then tried to go run in the Olympics versus people who were going to dedicate their lives to a pursuit. And essentially, this enters the era of professional athletics, an era in which we live today. But Roger Bannister and John Landy, Roger representing the UK and John Landy representing Australia, they didn't live in that era. They would eventually go on to choose other professions, but they were already starting to demonstrate the behaviors of a professional athlete. Bannister in particular, as a medical student, recorded all sorts of details about his stride, about his nutrition, his sleep, what time of day, what temperature, all of these factors, what type of track he ran on, all of these factors that he was trying to figure out how to tweak in order to improve by just a few seconds more and get himself to a zone, which he did eventually in early 1954, April to be precise. What Bannister showed was that breaking the 4-minute mile was just a question of excellence and effort. And this is important to me personally, coming back to what it means to run like a man, is to decide that, running a 4-minute mile isn't exactly what I'm going for, and in fact is impossible for me. But learning how to identify your barriers and work at them carefully over time so that you can trespass or cross past those barriers, that is what I think is so characteristic of these men who broke the 4-minute mile. Now, I misspoke in the early intro. I said that it was the year before the Miracle Mile, where Bannister and Landy went head-to-head, that Bannister broke the 4-minute mile. It was actually just a few months ahead of that. And it was right after that, when Bannister broke the 4-minute mile, that Landy committed himself. It's like, well, I've got to absolutely make this happen. And he broke the 4-minute mile, not by a fraction of a second, as Bannister had, but actually by a second and a half, setting a new record and already obliterating Bannister's new record. This, of course, you can imagine, didn't go over very well with Bannister. Lucky for all the world, there was a big competition coming up that Bannister and Landy had qualified to run the mile, one representing England, the other representing Australia, at what was called the Commonwealth Games, which would be held in Canada, Vancouver to be precise. Now, this particular game, think of it as all of the British Empire nations getting together, the Commonwealth, and having a mini Olympics just for nations and countries that are part of the British Empire. So, India's there, New Zealand is there, Australia is there, and so on and so on. So it wasn't really a global competition, but it did feature these two runners who happened to be world record holders each consecutively, and both of them came ready to absolutely nail it. Now, for Bannister, this was really fascinating because he was getting ready to retire. He was going to finish medical school and wanted to go into practice. This was just an amateur endeavor for him. So it really meant a lot to him and to Landy both. They get to Vancouver. There's a whole bunch of interesting things in the backstory. As I said before, I really do recommend that you read the book. But let's imagine that you're there in 1954, August, and you are watching this race unfold. Now, for those of you who haven't seen this, a general quarter-mile track, you go around it 4 times to get to a mile. And as you're going around the track several times, basically every runner has a different strength or a different strategy. Bannister was known for having a last quarter-mile kick, last eighth of a mile, really, where he gets on the backside of the 4th lap and just suddenly finds this speed and this stride that a lot of runners just can't muster at that stage. Now, as they were running this race, and Landy took an early lead and got ahead of Bannister, and what you're looking at here is specific images taken out of a video that was shot from the far side of the track. So this is as the men were coming around the final curve and swooping their way back to the finish line, that Landy is ahead. And Landy would later report that he really thought he had gotten Bannister and that maybe Bannister was not going to be able to do his famous kick in the end. But actually, Landy was mistaken. And not only was he mistaken, as he makes this curve and thinks, I'm just going to lean over my shoulder and see if I can see how far behind me Bannister is, Bannister's passing him on the right. And that's the image that's captured so beautifully in the print that I showed you earlier. And you look at it here, I can kind of point to it. It's this moment right here, I believe, where Landy's just looking, he's like, where is that Bannister guy? And meanwhile, Bannister passes him. Now, Bannister did actually find his famous kick at this point in the run. And as you can see already, he was able to muster a pretty solid lead within just a couple of strides. And Landy was unable to do anything. And both of them were able to finish the race in under 4 minutes. So this is the first time in history that in a competition, 2 men ran a 4-minute mile in the same race. And Bannister was able to recover his record for at least a while. And Landy was also able to take second in this race, but also prove that he was capable of repeating a 4-minute mile. What do we learn from all of this? We learn a couple of things that I think are very useful. First of all, we learn that contrary to what later would become popular in the 80s and 90s, where people would say, if you just have a positive mental attitude and really believe in yourself, you can do anything. In fact, there were some Yale professors who wrote a business book about mindset, and all you had to have was a winner's mindset. And because no one had ever broken the 4-minute mile, no one else believed you could do it, and therefore no one did it. And then once Bannister did it, it just shattered everyone's preconceptions, changed the mindset, and all of a sudden, dozens of runners in the next couple of years would break the 4-minute mile. That is completely wrong. If you have ever heard that, please forget it. Please tell anyone who ever told you that it was wrong. The reason these men broke the 4-minute mile was repeated effort and application of their intelligence as well as their stamina and fortitude. That's what broke the 4-minute mile. One of the reasons we know that is it wasn't suddenly possible for everyone who really believed in themselves to break the 4-minute mile. That did not happen. Yes, dozens of people did in the next year or two, and then hundreds of people in the next decade or two. By now, thousands. 2,000 probably is the best estimate we have. It's hard to keep track of this. 2,000 or so have broken the 4-minute mile since that time. Even though the rest of the running world has shifted to metrics, so they don't run the mile in, say, the Olympics, they run the 1,500 meters, which is a little bit shorter than a mile. But the mile is still famous because it has always been that thing that if you can do in under 4 minutes, you can really feel proud of yourself. But only a few thousand people have done this. Now, I say only a few thousand people have done this. The fact that anyone can is still amazing to me. And I want you to understand that every single year, some high school kid in America breaks the 4-minute mile. Not usually in competition where it counts on the list of people who've broken the 4-minute mile in competition, but it does happen. So today you can just have some kid, set up a camera and record you and post it to YouTube, which happens sort of every year, every other year, where someone breaks a 4-minute mile as timed by their friends at the track after school one day. So this is possible. But it's only possible for certain body types. And this is the thing that we're really learning. Once in athletics, you go from this amateur model to a professional model. And this was right at the cusp of that. It soon became possible for professionals to be paid to do this. Well, two things happen. One is their training methods improved to the point where you can shave seconds off. You can continue to shave seconds off. I believe that the current record for men is about 3 minutes and 43 seconds. Now, that's a record that hasn't budged in several years. But it is still nonetheless a record. That's significantly faster than a 4-minute mile, although, you say that's only 17 seconds faster. 17 seconds means a lot when you're talking about a 4-minute race. But the fact is, it's really just training to learn what is it that makes the difference. How do I start? What are my running mechanics? How do I provide the right nutrition? What's the role of supplements without getting into doping? All of that stuff is stuff that wasn't as prominently featured before the 4-minute mile was broken, and since the professionalization of athletics has become now very important, and most of these athletes undergo very significant medical and scientific analysis to figure out what it is about their body type that is going to give them the advantage, or perhaps need to be compensated for with some aspect of their training. And that's how we're shaving seconds off. The second part of that, of course, is money. Once you have money in the system, now you have kids who maybe could have been a cornerback or could have been a runner, or maybe could have said, running's fun, but I'd rather do something else with my life. Suddenly now they have a motivation to do so. And this is especially true for people coming from a lot of countries that produce amazing runners, like Jamaica, which is famous for its sprinters, Kenya, Ethiopia, both of which are producing long distance runners, as well as middle distance runners, which is milers. And these, the systems that are in place to find those people whose body types are perfect for the mile or for the 400 or for the whatever distance you're going to have someone run, including the marathon, which we were talking about before, and which I'm preparing for. It turns out that each one of these sports, it favors a very specific and narrow body type. And this is fascinating to consider, especially for that idea that I was trying to trash before about, well, you just have to believe in yourself and you can do it. No, you can't. It doesn't matter how much you believe in yourself. If you don't have the body type, you cannot run a 4-minute mile. You cannot. I'm not trying to be discouraging. I'm not trying to make you feel bad. You cannot. And that's what's so fascinating about what we're learning. Once you add money, those body types emerge. People find those people, train them, and say, look, you could make yourself famous and maybe rich, maybe get sponsored by Nike or what have you, if you decide to pursue this goal. This, of course, happens all across athletics now, and I think it's a good thing. But there's an ongoing debate over professionalization. So one of the things that I'm left with is going back to 1954, specifically so that I can get back into the heads of Roger Bannister and learn from them, because I'm never going to be able to compare myself to someone who broke a 4-minute mile even then or now, but I can compare myself to someone who said, I could just apply myself to this. I could sit down and figure this out, and I can improve myself. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do in this run. Now, just a reminder what I'm doing in this year-long project, the Year of Living Manly. I'm isolating the 41% of men who say, on a scale of 1 to 5, that they are very masculine. Now, I'm a 4 out of 5, and my whole life long, as I've said in prior videos, I've thought a 4 out of 5 was a good place to be. In fact, the best place to be, and it turns out I'm wrong. As I've shared in the data all along, men who score 5 out of 5 on the scale of masculinity are, in fact, better. They have better life outcomes, they contribute more to their relationships and to their families and their communities, and I should try to be more like them. Now, does that mean I need to go somehow run a 4-minute mile? Well, I hope not, because I can't do it. Don't have the body type. But what I am going to show you are some of the characteristics that I think these men, Roger Bannister and John Landy, the first 2 men to ever run a 4-minute mile, teach us. Let me just give you some of the data points. You know me, I am going to go to the data. Apologies for that, but no apologies really, because I think this is fascinating. Title of the figure here is simple. It's High Masculinity Prepares You Well to Take on Impossible Challenges. And if the 4-minute mile was supposedly an impossible challenge, well, these men had to have these characteristics in order to tackle this, and they did. Number 1, do they agree with the statement, I am ambitious? The 41% of men who consider themselves very masculine, 82% of them think that they are ambitious. That's almost twice as high as all other men. 76% of them want every detail taken care of. This is like Roger Bannister recording every detail about what made his runs successful and just paying attention to those details, especially when there's no trainer, there's no doctors, there's no a Nike sponsor that's making it possible for this to happen. They had to be detail-oriented because they were the only ones who cared about the details. 79% of these men like to solve complex problems, compared to 55% of all other men. Now, this is a complex problem, one that everyone thinks can't be done, but with the right approach and with the right persistence, you can attack. I also think you'd have to have a fairly strong personality. And these men, it seems weird today, we have a world of social media where people criticize, tweets or what have you. These men would get criticized if they lost a race. It's very fascinating. If you go back and read the book, I do still strongly recommend that you read The Perfect Mile. There it is. You'll get the backstory of what it was like for these men, in particular Roger Bannister, to represent England after the Second World War, which was having a little bit of a personal crisis of identity and having to deal with the recovery process. And Bannister is one of the big up-and-coming amateur athletes. The whole country kind of pins their hopes on him to say, go show in the Olympics that we are going to rebound and that we're the kind of country that's going to recover from this. So in the 1952 Olympics, Bannister goes and does not succeed. In fact, it's quite a failure. And the whole country just turns on him. I mean, it's just awful. You'd have to have a strong personality to persist in the face of that kind of disapproval. And he did, in fact. So ambitious, detail-oriented, likes to solve complex problems, has a strong personality. That was Bannister for sure. Landy as well, although his details don't make for as easy of a retelling of the story. But all of these men were actually in this characteristic. And by all accounts, they were just very, very good men. It's one of the reasons why I was very proud to acquire the print that I showed you before with their signatures on it. Now, these men are no longer with us. What they accomplished more than 60 years ago is now fading in the memory of some, not in my memory, but we can still learn from them. And that's what I'm hoping to accomplish, is learn from them how to run like a man. Now, for my upcoming marathon, we're now 2 weeks and change away from my upcoming marathon, where I hope to break my 4-hour marathon. This is nowhere near that kind of achievement. But understand, I've learned that it's okay. I don't have the body type necessary to break these kinds of records. There's a whole other book that I would share with you that would be worth your time and read as well. That book is The Sports Gene by David Epstein, now just a couple years old, but still very, very fresh and very, very relevant. A book in which we basically learn that your body type, in a world of professional sports in particular, where you have money that is funneled into finding the people whose bodies are already perfectly designed to do that thing, whether it's a long jump, a high jump, a shot put. It is absolutely the case that very specific body types are going to succeed in those kinds of events. And if you watched the Olympics recently, you saw the Summer Olympics in particular, where this is really on display. The body type is really like 70% of whether someone qualifies to run or participate in these elite events. And then beyond that, it's training, but even how your body responds to training is largely a function of genetics. And then whether or not you have the motivation to engage in that training and try to win, well, that's where it comes down to, in my case, running like a man. With all of that in mind, what I'm trying to do here in the marathon that's coming up is not prove that I'm an elite anything, because I'm not. Just like you can't run a 4-minute mile, I guarantee you cannot. If you can, prove me wrong. I'll love it. But you'll be one of the few thousand people who've ever been able to do that in the history of the world. You probably can run if you're a marathoner. On average, you're going to be faster than I am because I'm middle of the pack. But that doesn't mean I can't have ambition to be a faster runner. I can't pay attention to detail. And in the third video in this series of How to Run Like a Man, when I share the results of my marathon, I am going to share some of the details that I had to work on in order to get this right. Oh my goodness, I had to pay attention to so many things that I've learned now over many years of doing this in hopes that I can at least have one sub 4-hour marathon before I get so old that that's just not even possible. So that's detail. It's liking to solve complex problems. This is a very complicated problem with lots of variables moving, variables that affect all sorts of pieces of your running equation. And then I have to have a strong enough personality to say, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it even though on paper my run results seem kind of average. Not kind of, just average and below average for a man. But that's okay. Running like a man for me means learning these things about having manly characteristics, and that's what we're here to accomplish. So stay tuned. I'll keep you posted in part 3. Wish me luck on my run coming up here very soon.